society. So my focus this afternoon, is actually much more on what do we know from the brain research. So I'm going to keep that as my sort of frame throughout. If there's any point where you want to say, hang on, where's that coming from? I could list you all sorts of research and researchers. I won't do too much of that unless you ask for it, because really there's an enormous array of research, and it's all tending in the same directions as to what makes a difference. So, but feel free if you sort of think, hang on, does she really have any backing for this stuff she's saying? I can certainly tell you more about the researchers that it's based on. Myself, I'm actually a sociologist. I wasn't a brain researcher myself. I came at it interviewing students, interviewing educators, interviewing therapists, and that's what really led me to see the impact of violence on learning. But what I'm seeing is that the brain research really confirms it and really helps us see where we go, and really just makes it much more concrete. And I'm finding that when we share that concrete understanding with students, it's quite transformative. So, I just want to say a couple of things about how we'll work together before I leap in. I tend to suggest that we don't tell full stories of experiences, either our own or our students, but especially not our students, so that we keep this as a place where it's got that level of comfort that we won't have the stories leaping up, but we all know that they are present. They may be present for many of us ourselves, as well as for many of the students. So that I want to say. And then I also want to mention that the most brilliant survival strategy that many of us have learnt coming out of any experiences of violence is dissociation, or spacing out. So the stuff on your table, these are just things to fiddle with. Many people find that being able to fiddle with something without feeling that you would be shamed or told off for doing so actually really helps the brain work better. So it's here, there's some of the tables, there's some modeling clay, there's some of the stress balls, and there's pipe cleaners, and so feel free to explore which ones, it's going to just roll its way to you, which ones feel useful. What I've really learned in terms of the brain is that we're each different. And so the more we let ourselves explore, the more we create space for the students we work with to explore, the more we get to really utilize the best capacity of our brains. So, and then of course, we may space out, and so feel free to either just interrupt me and say, I missed the last piece, or catch me afterwards and say, can you fill in this piece I had a gap on? I've really come to believe that people often feel that they are stupid and get judged as not so smart because of the gaps. So if you're missing pieces and see things all fragmented, it's very hard to find the brilliance that is we get to when we see things as wholes. So those gaps can be really significant. So as I launch in, I want to say really the absolute most basic thing we learned through the brain research is that experience shapes our brain. In some ways it seems so obvious. All experience shapes our brain. It is what constructs it. It begins very, very limited formation, in fact, at birth. Our brains are what make birthing challenging. The bigger our brain, the bigger the head, the bigger to try and get through the birthing canal. So unlike most creatures, we're born with our brains very, very unformed. Only certain portions of the brain are formed, and we hear lots of humor about the fact that teenagers still are growing their brains, and that's why they don't understand consequences. And there's a lot of truth in that. The brain grows gradually over time, and different parts of the brain kick in over time. So experience shapes our brain. So I'm just going to show you a little tiny video clip that talks about why violence and neglect shapes the brain even more.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress,
I'm blocking
the
you,
stress
aren't I?
response system is activated.
That stops there in order to just make that point around how it is that any impact of any sort of trauma is what often is the case is that we stay up in that alert place. And that can be not even only from our own experiences, but from generations before us, can actually lead us to stay more in that stress place. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. But so it leads us often to then continue to have challenges around attention and focus, around emotion. So a little bit of emotion can then, feeling bad can send you skyrocketing. Feeling good can also have a powerful impact. Relationships, the world feels unsafe, so safer to be aggressive or compliant. So I mentioned those pieces earlier today. The real key, I think, in these is that they're all things that we then often put labels on, and then when we put labels, then we end up going much more to a place that is more about we've got to fix them rather than seeing that they come out of survival mechanisms. So when we start with an understanding that our brain is shaped to survive, then we can actually start feeling good about what the brain does rather than, oh, well, there's something wrong. I am all these problem things. Instead, it's like, no, I have a brilliant brain that adapted. Now the task is to take it further. So experience shapes the brain. And it's important to know, I think, that our parents' and grandparents' experiences shape our brains too. It adds, I think, more understanding to how it is that the impacts of residential school, the impacts of past wars, even ones that our parents, grandparents were part of, impacts of some of the traumas that our parents and grandparents have experienced. This is very, very new research that is actually showing that our parents and grandparents' experiences turn on and off DNA. So there was this wonderful finding in Sweden, but I'll go on to another little video clip to just tell us a little bit more about that.
We are on the brink of uncovering a hidden...
Which is why I think it is then so important to actually say, if we know how our brain works, we know what it is that causes our brain to shift in these ways, then we can start re-sculpting it. And that's where for me the hope is. We now understand that actually brains are shaped and changing. And we understand now that neuroplasticity, sorry, I keep standing in your road and then worrying about the camera versus your road to the projector. So we now understand that neuroplasticity works throughout the entire lifespan. It's not the way it used to be believed as only in the first 5 years of life. And we now understand that if we can change our own brain, we change the conditions that then shape our children's brains and our grandchildren's brains. So it's like there is enormous hope and enormous sense of possibility, and the more we understand about our brains and the more those we're trying to support in learning understand about their brains, the more they can resculpt them. So that, I think, is the core of this. We can reshape brains, and every experience helps us to do that. Let's go on to how can we sculpt it. I'm going to draw from some of Dan Siegel's work because his imagery, I think, just gives us something to play with. This is his image of mental health, is his idea being in the flow, in the boat that is going down the river and that can cope with what eventualities come. He argues that all the mental illnesses really fall into either side of that flow. The chaos, overwhelm, complete muddle the other side, the rigidity, and that sense of having to be in control. And so he argues that once it becomes really entrenched as a pattern on either side, then it becomes something that we begin to call a mental illness. Something like, the perfect example is obsessive compulsive disorder. Clearly that's that degree of rigidity of trying to control the world. And chaos, overwhelm, there's all sorts of versions of. But we don't have to go as far as labeling it as mental illness. We also all have moments where we slide either way. We feel chaos, overwhelmed, can't cope, sort of internally and externally, or we're gripping onto things really tight and saying it's got to be this way because we can't bear it, feels impossible to let it go. Health is that we go to either side and we're able to kick ourselves off back into the flow before too long. And when it becomes really entrenched one way or the other, that's where it's becoming problematic. And it's really becoming clearer and clearer that it is our experiences that shape, and as I say, our parents and our grandparents' experiences that shape the patterns that we call mental illness. Not only the ones that we usually recognize as coming from trauma, like post-traumatic stress disorder, but the others too. If you dig back a few generations, usually it's clear that there is trauma, even if it's not in the person's own life. So there's a bit of a contested field now in the mental health of those who are saying trauma, violence really contributes to these patterns, and those who are saying, no, it's just a chemical imbalance. But the question, I think, for those who argue chemical imbalance is, so why a chemical imbalance? And I think often then we can see that the issue with trauma is, as was shown in that first little clip, if we're responding to trauma all the time, then what's being kicked out into our systems is the cortisol and the adrenaline that are preparing us for fight and fleeing and for freezing, especially if we are more vulnerable, we're more likely to freeze. If we are more powerful as an adult or finding a way to be more capable, then we're more likely to go to fight and fleeing. But a tiny baby is going to freeze. And so we're going to see those different reactions then staying in place if that's what experience has shaped us to. So if we can understand the brain a little bit more, it's quite helpful. So Dan also has a drawing for us to think about the brain, and I think this is a lovely way of avoiding having to get caught in every name of every part of the brain, because there are a lot of names. They're very hard to remember, and that doesn't feel so empowering as getting a general sense of the brain. So Dan Siegel talks about our downstairs brain and our upstairs brain. And the downstairs is where, as he would put it, the plumbing is and all the supplies, and upstairs is where it's more expansive, more possibility. Upstairs is where the planning, the thinking, the imagining happens up there, and it's in this lower area that these immediate reactions of anger and fear and so on come. I think the one word name that it is quite helpful to know is this idea that it's the amygdala. That's the part of the brain that fires up whenever we're in fight or flight or freeze mode. That's the part that is saying, alert, alert. It's a little bit like the fire alarm going off with flashing lights and loads of sound. That is what's telling us. And it's the most basic part of our brain, really. It just is trying to keep us alive. So, like the fire alarm, where you're not supposed to stop and say, now exactly what's the problem here? It's like, get out of here now, this second, because it might threaten your life. And so that's our amygdala fires up. And if, as I've shown in that idea of the toxic stress, if we've had a lot of stress, then that amygdala fires up as if it's life-threatening at the tiniest bit of anxiety. So it's really important to understand that, because then we understand, okay, well, my brain is actually trying to protect me. It's trying to keep me alive. Or my students' brains, when it seems like they're doing things that just get in the way of their learning, get in the way, like don't seem constructive, but that amygdala is trying to keep them alive. And when the amygdala is firing to try and keep us alive, has no interest at all in long-term survival, because long-term survival might not happen. It's only focused on immediate survival. And that's when all sorts of physiological reactions come. It mobilizes every iota of glucose it can find in order to give us more energy. That's one of the reasons that we're now seeing so much diabetes. If we're in flight or fight mode, then all our glucose is being mobilized, is being brought into the system. We crave more glucose because we need it for that energy that the cortisol and adrenaline is telling us that we need, because it's saying, life-threatening moment here. Yes, do ask questions whenever you want. Go.
Is that good for you that you're saying, or is it bad?
It's good for you to survive in the moment.
I mean, when you're taking all that stuff.
If it's staying on all the time, it's terribly bad for us.
Oh.
So that's why it's so important for us to learn to come down from it. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. So it's focused on immediate survival. It's pumping out cortisol. It's pumping out adrenaline. It's saying, give you enough strength to run 100 times faster than you would ever be able to run in order to outrun the tiger that is about to catch you. And it's sending all your blood supply to your arms, to your legs. That's why you'll see so many folks with legs vibrating, because it is giving us energy. That's what it's designed to do. And so understanding that it's designed to do that, and given the sorts of ways that our thermostat may have just been cranked up, or the students we're working with, thermostat is cranked up, then we've got to figure out how to bring it back down again. So we'll look at that a little bit more. But seeing, sort of understanding that that's a little bit about the brain can be helpful, and that, when we've got our blood supply rushing to our limbs, it's not going to our stomach to help our digestion, for instance, but more importantly in learning, it's not going to the upstairs brain to help us in planning and thinking. It's not good survival. We don't want to stop and think. In the emergency moment, we want to just get out of there. And so we may find ourselves actually teaching a group of students who, if their brains have been shaped by experiences of violence, they're anxious in the classroom, they have no blood supply to the part of the brain we would like them to use to think creatively, to engage with our math lesson, and so on. So we've got to help them understand the brain and shift so that they can come down and get out of that place and get the blood supply coming back where we need it for learning. So just a couple more illustrations of the brain and what's going on. So we have a right portion to our brain, a left portion to the brain. It's not separated in the way that we used to think it was, but it's the right that's connected to that firing from the amygdala. The right and the emotional mode, it's where that instant feeling of anger or huge wells of feeling, they come from that immediate connection from the amygdala to there. What's challenging is trauma makes the link between the two halves of the brain weaker. And so the more we can help to strengthen the connection between the right mode and the left mode, the easier it is to bring the left and logical and linear part online. It's a bit like a computer. It's like a piece of it's offline for the moment. We want to bring it in. That's where the language center is too. So we need to strengthen connections between right and left mode, because right is just getting its messages fired up from the amygdala if the amygdala is on alert. So we may think we're teaching students, but they actually may be all on alert mode and not hearing or seeing anything. So what can we do about it? That's really the next question. What are we going to be able to do? We get a sense of the brain. What can we do about it? So, yes, do you have a question?
I think we can move on and stop letting things in our brain that's not going to be comfortable with us.
Aha! Well, it's true. We don't want to keep having things happening in our brain that put us on alert, but many of us have learnt to be on alert already. So things have gone. So yes, the more we can keep children safe, the more when children get scared, we calm them, then the more we help to develop the pathways so that the amygdala doesn't fire non-stop. But if we've got our brains shaped that way, or those we're working with have already got their brains shaped by all of that, there's still a whole lot we can do to reshape the brain. So one of the things we can do to reshape the brain is naming it. Dan Siegel talks about name it to tame it. And that's really helpful. If we do name it to tame it, anything we do in the way of naming helps to calm that. You saw that alert nervous system? Just naming, it's not happening right now, but this is your brain being brilliant from what it learnt before. The active MRIs show the brain starts calming down. The amygdala just, So naming is incredibly powerful. So the more we can name it and talk about it, the better it is. So that's a really central one. So I showed this earlier, the elephant in the room. If we start talking about the elephant that's in the room, instead of pretending it's not there, then that's the beginning of naming it. But just the very fact that we name at the start of classes, we just sort of say, yeah, and violence will have impacted a lot of us in our learning here. Suddenly it becomes something that is ordinary, and then, so we're really going to work at creating as safe an environment as possible. It just becomes named, it becomes ordinary. So instead of pretending there's no elephant there, if we actually start really turning, facing it, naming it, looking at it, it makes a difference. As we name also, we take ourselves into left brain. And so we are beginning to strengthen that connection between right and left brain. And the stronger that pathway is, the more possible it is to hold the two parts together, to hold the area of emotion that may take us off into chaos, the area of logic and linear thinking that can take us off into rigidity. Balance and the flow is that we're connected to both halves of our brain. And to be connected to both halves of our brain, we want that connection to be really strong. And to build the connection, one of the things we do is name it. Any questions or comments at this point?
Name some of the things that you think is foolish about.
Sorry?
Name some of the things you think foolish or silly about.
No, naming the way in which we're feeling, naming what it is that may have happened, naming, at this moment I'm just caught back in the past. Then the very naming that in this moment I got triggered, then that helps to bring us back from being triggered, bring us back from being caught in the past. Does that make sense?
Sure, makes sense to me.
There's lots of rather blank faces. Is this because you're taking it all in? Any questions, any comments? Is it all familiar? Is some of it new? Okay. It makes sense. Okay. All right, I'm going to go on to a little, I mentioned Dan Siegel.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been...
I was going to pause before I started it, but it just didn't easily let me. He is talking, as you can tell in this one, to parents about children. But I've found actually working with adults and using that hand model idea is still a lovely way of thinking more clearly about the brain and realizing that sense of, okay, what do I need now? Because it's coming apart. I'm in that place where it's just the amygdala is firing rather than the whole brain being online and in connection. And so it's a way of being able to make this idea that we can resculpt our own brains a little bit more concrete. So that I wanted just to introduce that to you as part of this. So that section I was really wanting to focus on what are some simple ways of just making it clear how our brain is structured and what it looks like and how it's working. So before we go on to the next section, my next section is to think about, okay, so what can we do? How can I help my brain grow? How can I re-sculpt it? And we almost can, you know, almost literally re-sculpt it as we start to think about how do I want to change it. And it's not instant, but it really is. It's a little bit like, I think of it as being like a pathway through the woods. And you know how if that path keeps getting followed, after a while it dips, you know, there's no growth there, it gets really entrenched. So we have to start new pathways. And it's hard. We keep sliding back into the old pathways until we get the new pathways really well practiced. But before we move into the section of really thinking more about, well, what can we do to resculpt? Let's actually do something to just change our own brains. So at this moment, let's we'll take a brain break. And so I encourage you to either close your eyes or just, it may feel more comfortable for you to just sort of look down, but sort of stop taking in me and the room and just let yourself go inward, and we'll take a little brain break. So either you might remember a place that has just really nurtured you. Maybe it's on the beach, or maybe it's in the woods, or where's a place where you just feel, this relaxes me, this takes care of me. So there may be a real place, or you may want to imagine a place. It could be outside, it could be inside, maybe it's in the most comfortable bed with a huge comforter over you. But just take yourself quietly to a place that just gives you comfort. And bring it into being for yourself as much as you can. So notice what you hear in that place. And imagine yourself hearing it. Notice what you see in that place. And imagine yourself seeing it. Notice what you smell, what you taste, the textures you touch. And just let your breath be as deep and easy, and just take in that place. Try and take it in with every sense that your imagination can bring you. Take a couple more deep breaths there, and then gradually and soak it right in. Let it nurture you, comfort you, give you a break. And then a last deep breath, carrying some of that relaxation it gave you back into this room with you when you're ready. Did you go there?
Momentarily.
Didn't give you quite enough time, perhaps, to really fully get there.
It started coming down.
You could feel yourself beginning to come down?
Yeah, it just took me a while.
Great.
Things, yeah.
Anybody else? Did you go somewhere? Oh yes, there's some smiles. And there's some mellower looks. So we do literally change our brain when we do something like that. We do, and the more we do it and the longer we do it, we could do that, could literally work for 15 minutes and then do that for 5. And it might help us to actually stay in a place. If we're somebody who's on huge alert, that might allow us to keep our brains working because it puts us into a different place. So we're going to do a little bit more now about how we can really sculpt our brain. What can we do? So the first thing we can do is we can actually tell new stories. You wouldn't believe it really, but the stories we tell also actually help to carve those pathways through the brain. Every time we tell a story again about this is what I'm like, I'm somebody who, we do actually make those pathways a little stronger. So if we're working with folks who are continually, even if internally are not saying it out loud, feeling stupid, wrong, can't do it, really, there I go again, then they are helping themselves carve that pathway stronger. So the more we can help people tell new stories about themselves, the better it is for actually making it possible to do something new. And we often say that, oh, tell a positive, give it a positive spin, tell a different story. But I don't think we previously knew quite how substantially that actually changes the brain. So it is literally, and when we know that, I think it also gives us much more encouragement that really it is worth my trying to interrupt that old monologue, and the more I say something different, it actually will carve out a new pathway. It's quite remarkable how much just thinking about something changes the brain. Even just thinking about doing a movement. If I imagined myself turning around, doing a sort of big twist, imagining doing that twist will do almost as much for my body as if I actually do it. So that stretches my muscles. But if I just sat here and thought about it, then I've changed it just a little bit too, because I've actually made the pathways to that connection. So we often tease people and say if they just sit on the couch and think about exercise, it doesn't do any good, but it does do something. So we need to learn and teach ways that get us a distance from our old patterns and from our thoughts and our feelings. If we think they are me, then they remain me. If we can get a little bit of a distance, then we can begin to shift that a little bit. So, right place. Oh, sorry, that one went out of order. That one should have come first. That was the sense around the stories and that sense of as we change the stories, that's so important because it allows us then to enhance the neuroplasticity. So sorry, I wanted to say one more thing about the stories before I moved on to the idea of creating the distance. So first of all is that sense that the stories, and part of the power of the stories is that they raise the stress, and when the stress is raised, our brains are less plastic, less able to shift. So if we can really shift them, then that helps us to create the new stories. So what I wanted to go on to was that piece around the distance. So if we can get to a place where rather than saying these thoughts are me, these feelings are me, these body sensations are me, we can be in a place sort of that's more at the center, looking out on those, then that helps us to shift from being gripped by them and gripped by the past, and makes it more possible to begin to form the new structures. Again, this is Dan Siegel and his image of the aware hub, but it's what, in some ways, a lot of the mindfulness, the meditation allows us to get is some of that distancing. It's not going to stay forever. That thought that's so hard, it will pass. That feeling that's flowing over me, if I can get just a little bit of a step back from it, I can allow it to pass through much faster. And that's also part of what then begins to shape the possibility for change. So just that, when we can support the students we work with just to step back a little. There's been an enormous amount of research now that's showing that mindfulness work, that anything that allows, Dan Siegel talks about it as mind sight and has a beautiful book around it. If we can get that little bit of distance, then it really helps to strengthen the possibility of resculpting and creating the change. So we really enhance neuroplasticity when we are helping with that shift. So I showed this before, but I want to look at this a little bit farther. When we are trying to work with somebody and support them around the brain changing, it's really helpful to recognize that chaos place from the original river picture is here. It's at the top of the graph. That brick wall, the rigid part from the other bank of the river is down below, and we're looking to find the sweet spot. We're looking to find the sweet spot for ourselves. We're looking to support students to find the sweet spot. If we're not helping them find the sweet spot, we may be putting a whole lot of effort into teaching when there's actually no blood supply and it's not really very helpful. So we need to support students, not only trying to offer things that help them to get into that sweet spot, but also helping them to understand for themselves so that they can offer themselves things that will help them get into the sweet spot. So we're going to try a few things that might help us get into the sweet spot next. So try one of the key things we might want to do is we need to try to deal with the stress, remembering that the stress is giving us all this cortisol and adrenaline that's giving us energy. It's getting us ready to fight. It's getting us ready to flee. And it's flowing through our bodies, our students' bodies. So we need to find a way to release it. So one thing we can do, it's not easy just to try and go straight into relaxation if you're really wired up. It's helpful to play with sort of ups and downs to get it back under control. So we're going to try a way of doing it. So I want to encourage you to stamp your feet and bang the table, and I'm going to be like the director, sending us up with the sound and down with it again. So try it. Let's see how much noise we can make together and see if we can really make a lot of sound together. And let it go up and up and up and up and up and up and up. And then bring it gradually down again. Let's go up again. You don't have to stop the moment I start going down. Let it just gradually drop. Let's try one more time. Now, if you were already feeling calm, that may have upped your energy some. If you were somebody who was really right up, playing with bringing up and down actually helps to learn that ability to regulate it. Because part of what's happened, as I said, it's like the thermostat turned up high. You can't just turn it down. It's like you've got to get a hold of it in some ways to bring it down and bring it up again. What else do you think you might do to clear some of the cortisol and adrenaline, get to that place of calm, come back down from that top level? What else might you do that would get rid of some of that energy, that cortisol, that adrenaline that's racing through the body?
Physical activity.
Yes, any physical activity can really help. Depends on which one somebody enjoys, but literally anything that is a strong physical activity will release a lot of that, and will also begin to kick in those frontal lobes where analytical thinking goes. So folks who have had a lot of tough experiences, doing something strong physical before sitting down to try and do something that's you want your brain to be fully present can make all the difference in the world. I'll go for a 20-minute bicycle ride if I want my brain to work at its best. It's all it needs, and then it will be fully in gear in a whole different way. What else might you do?
Relaxation or focus techniques.
Yes, any of those sorts of things might work for somebody. Somebody else may have too much energy, but any sort of stepping down, relaxation things. Anything with sound can make a huge difference. Yes, so music of different sorts, and it will be different for different people. Somebody's calming music is somebody else's grating on their nerves music. Some person may need really loud, raucous music, and then bringing it down. Another wonderful one is if you drum, a whole bunch of pails and just drumming rather than us. We used our just ground and table, but drumming is very satisfying, and again that sense of make it loud, bring it soft. So that sense of, it's almost like harnessing it, bringing it back. It's mine, it's my energy, can I bring it in? And I may have to sort of go with it high to then bring it in. But that's part of what we can do to come down from that place. And if we work with students that they find their own, then of course, they can go out and do something they need to come back to be there. So that's the coming down from up there. But then of course we've got the other folks. We've got the folks who are totally numb, absent, not home. That's sometimes almost a more challenging one to find the way around, to find the way to come into presence. But one of the strongest things, so now let's try now. Try just rubbing your thighs. Rub both hands on your thighs and just see how that feels. How does it feel? It's interesting. Seems to lead to some interesting reactions. It led to some hilarity, which is all good, because there is nothing like laughter to release some of the tensions. So anything we can do that can create humor can be helpful too, as long as, of course, it's not at anybody's expense. But that sense of rubbing your thighs can be very, very powerful in bringing mind and body together. So that just trying that I had a beautiful experience of working. I was doing the research on a course that was working with women who were mostly currently in domestic violence situations. Some were living in shelters, some were actually still with the abuser, but they were all currently in the midst of the chaos. And they were actually in a pre-apprenticeship program, and what was absolutely stunning was that in the end they actually did as well as the ordinary cohort of people in a pre-apprenticeship program. And one of the things that was clear that made the biggest difference was they had a counselor available to them the whole time. And initially, it was a full-time program. Initially, the counselor made appointments at the end of the day. Hardly any students showed. So she was a very creative soul, so she thought, well, I'm obviously not meeting their needs. I better sit in on the class and figure out what it is they might need. And she sat there and she realized she could see students losing it. They were getting triggered, they weren't really present. So she started that all she did was she'd just catch their eye and she'd walk out of the classroom. And if they wanted to, they went out with her and they talked. What she very quickly found was that they only wanted to talk to her for about 2 minutes. That completely triggered me. Okay, I'm done now. And they came back into class. So gradually she found that all she had to do was catch their eye and just illustrate. Just remind them, give them a smile, and she'd rub her thighs, she'd rub one hand with the other. They would remember, and they would do it too. And she'd look at them, sometimes she'd still walk out, but she said gradually over time, they very rarely followed her out, they very rarely needed to talk. All they needed was the reminder that they could ground themselves. And they stayed, most of them stayed present. Very few students dropped out, and they stayed present through the entire course, through terrifying stuff. They were learning to weld, they were learning all sorts of things that they were all absolutely terrified by. But that presence, the witnessing presence and the reminder that they themselves could ground themselves, became, as most of them told me, was the biggest thing that helped them stay present. So the power of something little like that, I think, is quite amazing. So there's a grounding example. All right. So, to be slightly, we're up. Something very strange has been happening to my slides. So right before we go there, what's going on with my system today? So they're the things I've just given us the examples of. Learn to calm the limbic system, the amygdala. We can learn to ground and get present, because part of what that's about is being in the here and now. It isn't life-threatening now, but my amygdala might think it's life-threatening. And so it's, can I find a way to actually help my amygdala to stop acting on past evidence and notice what's right in front of me right now? And it is connecting to the body that really helps to figure out what's needed. And so the challenge is that when we've been through trauma, most often we're very disconnected to body. And so part of what we're doing is supporting people to connect to body. And so breathing, mindfulness, and any sort of body work that works in your setting, yoga or Tai Chi or brain gym, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's something that helps to calm and connect to body, because then body tells us what is needed. Oh, I'm coursing with adrenaline, I'd better go for a walk and then I'll come back and then I can concentrate. Oh, no, I'm numb. All right, what do I need to get here? If we're disconnected from body, it's hard to get the messages, and so old patterns just stay and stay and stay. It's not going to actually let me bring that one down. All I really wanted to say with that was that it's relationships that make such a huge difference. So it's why it's so important that we have some sense of this, because we can, it's relationships that give that supportive space that allows us to come down, relax the guard enough to then start noticing. So if we want to resculpt brains, then it's about how do we really connect to create that sense of connection that makes it possible to reshape the brain. So really, as I sort of look at the key pieces, we're saying that violence, trauma changes the brain. Changes the brain because past generations, future generations. So, but just like all experience changes the brain, but this can change the brain in ways that it gets us so much on alert that we even cease to know that we could change the brain. And so that's, I think, why it's so important. Once we realize that the repeated violence and trauma really raises the thermostat, so that you're almost always in that fight-flight mode, or the freeze mode, then we can really start actually thinking differently about the students, about their own brains, and about those in front of us. So that understanding what's going on, I think, is very important and very empowering. And what I'm seeing is that the more people sort of get a sense of it, the more they can begin to develop their own repertoire. If you've got your own repertoire, then it becomes a little more possible to think about, yes, so what can I do? So it's conditions of safety, calm, and connectedness that are going to create that sweet spot. And really the challenging thing is we often think we're doing loads to create safety, but we're still seeing loads of the behavior that, if we now look at it that way, we know is telling us that people's amygdalas are firing. So then the question is, how can we keep doing more and creating more sense of safety? And that's the real challenge. So lastly, I want to really encourage you to think about being curious and helping the students to be curious. If we have the frame that says, everything our brain is doing is trying to help us survive, rather than what's wrong, then it's like, well, what's going on here? What's making that happen? What can we do? What shifts it? And so one of the things I've found really helpful, it depends, at different ages I frame it in different ways, but the more we think about being a detective, keeping a journal and really noticing when am I able to concentrate? When am I more anxious? What goes on? Can really make a huge, huge, huge difference. And then if we are going to be able to be curious and not get triggered ourselves by all of the behavior that makes us sort of despair, is somebody ever going to change? How are they doing? Then we have to take care of ourselves. So one more last little piece of Dan Siegel is that sense that he really reminds us that we need all the range of our own care. We need sleep. We need physical time. We need time where we're focused, time that's time in that inner reflective place, the downtime, the complete relaxation, the play, and times of connecting. And so do our students. If he was playing with, in the States, there's the idea of a healthy food platter. He's saying, well, we need a healthy mind platter. But it's a really important piece, I think, to remember that we need that care for ourselves, because it's our ability to connect that will create the environment within which a student can resculpt their own brain. If we're absent, then it's hard for them to engage with us and be present themselves. And it's hard for us to keep being curious. It just begins to get frustrating, and we're more likely to be more reactive. So that's, I think, a really important piece. And so as we think about what next, as we come to just the closing of this, I want you to just think a moment or two about, so what is key that you're left with? What's a thought, what's a feeling, what's an idea that it just might push you one little step further around providing an environment that is wonderful for others to sculpt their brain and learn more. But this was only a very brief starting point, so think too about what could you take further? Where could you explore further? I put up on the wall just a few key sections from the Learning and Violence website, because I knew we wouldn't have time to go to the site, but I really encourage you to keep exploring there. There's some links to some of the brain research there too, and so yeah, that might take you there. And in your handout there's some of the key brain research people at the end. There's also a user's guide to the brain that I wrote for adult literacy students, so a piece that might work for students. And so I encourage you to think about where you might explore further. I encourage you to think too about who might be an ally. It's hard to keep this stance that it shifts a little bit, that stance from, just learning disability, mental health problems, and keep to the stance of how has violence and trauma shaped the brain and how can we reshape it. And so I encourage you to think about allies. And lastly, I encourage you to think about who can you teach what you learned here today, who can you pass it on to. And so just a last moment of any last words you have. And I invite you to all take a stone, pick one that appeals to you, to stick in your pocket and help you continue to think about this. And lastly, so what will help you continue to deepen curiosity? And so you've got a stone with a question mark on it to put in a pocket Perhaps when you're teaching, it'll be in your pocket, and maybe you have a perfect little carry spot for something like that.